The text message came in at 6:42 p.m. "Working late again, babe, don't wait up." I stared at those 5 words for almost a full minute. Not because they were unusual. He'd sent me some version of that message every week for the past 4 months. But that night, something inside me just stopped believing him. Maybe it was the way he'd started angling his phone away from me at dinner. Maybe it was the new cologne I found in his gym bag, a scent he never wore for me. Or maybe it was simply a wife's instinct, that quiet alarm bell that rings long before the mind is ready to admit what the heart already knows. My name is Rachel. I was 35 years old, married for 11 years to a man named Daniel, and up until that night, I truly believed that we had a good marriage. Not perfect, no marriage is, but good, solid, built on trust. That night, I put on my coat, grabbed my car keys, and did something I never thought I would do. I followed my own husband. And what I found at the end of that drive didn't just break my heart. It shattered the entire life I thought I was living. This is not just a story about cheating. This is a story about what happens when a woman who has been underestimated for years finally decides she's done being quiet. Stay with me till the end, because the revenge that followed was so calm, so calculated, and so complete that Daniel never saw it coming until it was far too late to stop it. Let me take you back a little, so you understand exactly what was at stake. Daniel and I met in our mid-20s at a mutual friend's wedding. He was funny, ambitious, and he made me feel like the only woman in the room. We got married 2 years later, and for a long time, life was genuinely good. We bought a small house in the suburbs. We built careers. I worked as a senior accountant at a logistics firm, and Daniel worked his way up to a regional sales manager position at a tech company. We had our ups and downs like any couple, but we always talked things through. Or so I thought. By the time we hit our 10th anniversary, things had shifted, quietly. The way a slow leak in a tire doesn't feel dangerous until the day you're suddenly stranded on the highway. Daniel started working longer hours, business trips became more frequent, phone calls became shorter, and always ended the moment I walked into the room. I told myself it was just stress, pressure from his job. The economy. Everyone's marriage goes through a dry patch, right? I filled the silence with excuses because the alternative that my husband might be lying to me felt too painful to even consider. But there's a particular kind of exhaustion that comes from constantly explaining away your partner's behavior. I didn't know it yet, but I had been doing exactly that for almost a year. Then came the little things that started piling up like small stones. Until one day the pile was too big to ignore. His phone was always face down. He started taking calls in the garage. He forgot his wedding ring at the gym twice. And one Friday night, I found a receipt in his jacket pocket for a hotel room. Not a business hotel near his office. A boutique hotel 40 minutes away, on the opposite side of town. Dated for a night, he told me he was staying late at work. I didn't confront him. Not yet. I wanted proof, not suspicion. Because I knew that the moment I said something, he would have an explanation ready, smooth, calm, believable, the way he always did. So I waited, I watched, and I planned. The night everything changed started like any other. Daniel came home from work around 5:30, showered, changed into a shirt I had never seen him wear before, and told me he had a client dinner that would run late. He kissed my cheek, grabbed his car keys, and walked out the door without even looking back. I stood in the kitchen for exactly 3 minutes after his car left the driveway. Then I grabbed my own keys, told our 15-year-old son I was running to the store, and got into my car. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel. Part of me hoped I was wrong. Part of me almost turned around twice. But something deeper, something that had been quietly building inside me for months, pushed me forward. I followed his car at a careful distance, staying 2 or 3 vehicles behind, the way I'd seen in movies but never imagined doing myself. He didn't drive toward his office. He didn't drive toward any restaurant I recognized. Instead, he pulled into the parking lot of that same boutique hotel from the receipt. My heart was pounding so hard, I thought I might be sick right there in the car. I parked across the street in the shadow of a closed bakery and watched. Daniel got out of his car, straightened his jacket, and walked toward the entrance. And then a woman stepped out from the lobby doors to meet him. She was maybe 30, professionally dressed, with dark hair pulled into a neat bun. She smiled at him, not a polite smile, not a coworker's smile, but the kind of smile reserved for someone you're excited to see, someone you've been waiting for. Daniel reached out and touched her waist as they walked inside together. I sat in my car for what felt like hours, though it was probably only 20 minutes, feeling a strange, cold numbness spread through my chest. It wasn't the sharp, screaming pain I expected. It was quieter than that. Heavier, like the moment the floor disappears beneath you, and you're falling, but somehow still standing still. I didn't storm inside. I didn't call him screaming. I didn't do any of the things you see in dramatic movies. Instead, I took out my phone and I took a photo of them walking in together. Then, I drove home in silence, walked into my own house, kissed my son goodnight, and lay awake in my bed until the sun came up, planning exactly what I was going to do next. The next morning, I didn't say a single word to Daniel about what I'd seen. He came downstairs, poured his coffee, and talked about how exhausting his client dinner had been the night before. I smiled and nodded and asked if he wanted eggs. That morning, something in me had already changed. The wife who once needed answers to feel okay was gone. In her place was a woman who no longer needed to ask questions because she was going to find every answer herself. I spent the next few days doing quiet detective work of my own. I didn't hire anyone. I didn't need to. I simply paid attention in ways I hadn't allowed myself to before. I found the woman's name through Daniel's own company directory, which I still had access to from an old shared work event years ago. Her name was Vanessa. She worked in the marketing department, a department Daniel had randomly started collaborating with over the past 8 months, right around the time his behavior had changed. I looked her up. Her social media was mostly private, but a few photos were public. Team lunches, work conferences, and in 3 of those photos, taken at different events months apart, Daniel was standing beside her, always a little too close, always looking a little too comfortable. The story became clearer with every photo, every message I glimpsed on his phone screen when he wasn't careful enough. Every late night that suddenly made sense. Daniel wasn't just having a moment of weakness. This wasn't a one-time mistake he panicked about. This was a relationship. Structured, repeated, planned around our life like a second life, running quietly underneath the one I thought we shared. And the cruelest part? He was good at hiding it. Frighteningly good. Which meant this wasn't new behavior for him. This was a skill he had built over time. I remember sitting in my car outside my office one afternoon, staring blankly through the windshield, thinking about every vacation we canceled because he was too busy, every anniversary dinner he arrived late to, every time I apologized to him for being too sensitive when I asked if everything was okay between us. He had let me carry the guilt of a marriage he was the one damaging. And in that moment, sitting alone in that parking lot, the sadness inside me slowly began transforming into something else entirely. Something sharper, something patient, something that Daniel, with all his confidence, never once suspected was coming. I want to be honest with you about something. In the days after I found out, part of me wanted to scream at him the moment he walked through the door. Part of me wanted to throw every plate in our kitchen cabinet at the wall just to feel something loud enough to match the noise in my head. But I didn't, because screaming gives away power, and I had already given Daniel enough power over my life for 11 years. Instead, I made a decision that would define everything that came after. I was going to gather complete, undeniable proof, protect myself financially and legally, and then take back control of my own story on my own terms, at a time of my choosing. The first thing I did was quietly consult a lawyer. Not to file anything yet, just to understand my rights, our shared finances, our house, and what a fair separation would actually look like if it came to that. I learned something that shocked me. Several months earlier, Daniel had transferred a significant amount of money out of one of our joint savings accounts into a separate account I hadn't known existed. Money that was supposed to be our safety net, our future. He wasn't just cheating on our marriage. He was quietly cheating me out of what we had built together. The second thing I did was start collecting evidence carefully, legally, and without ever tipping him off. Screenshots of messages left open by accident. Hotel and credit card statements. The photo from that night outside the hotel. Dates and times, all organized, all backed up in more than one place. The third thing I did was the hardest. I kept living my normal life. I made his favorite meals. I asked about his day. I let him believe completely that I had no idea what he was doing. Every single day, I stood in my own kitchen looking at a man who was destroying our family from the inside, and I smiled at him. People sometimes ask, how could you pretend for that long? And the honest answer is, because pretending gave me time. Time to protect myself. Time to protect my son. Time to make sure that when the truth finally came out, Daniel wouldn't be able to spin it, minimize it, or twist it into something that was somehow my fault. I wasn't going to let him control the ending of this story the way he had quietly controlled everything else. For the first time since that night outside the hotel, I felt something other than pain. I felt purpose. About 3 weeks into my quiet investigation, something happened that almost pushed me to abandon my careful plan entirely. I came home early from work with a headache, something Daniel didn't know because I hadn't told him. As I pulled into the driveway, I noticed his car was already there hours before he usually returned. My stomach tightened immediately. I walked into the house quietly and heard his voice coming from the home office. He was on the phone and he wasn't being careful. I told you, I just need a little more time to figure things out. Rachel doesn't know anything. She trusts me completely. My chest went cold. He continued, his voice lowering. Once things settle with the house situation, we can talk about actually moving forward. I just can't blow everything up right now, not with the money still tied up. He was talking to Vanessa. And he was talking about our house, our money, planning some kind of future that clearly didn't include me while still keeping me exactly where I was, unaware, so he could benefit from our shared life until it was convenient for him to leave it. I stood in that hallway, silent, feeling something break open inside me that had been holding steady until then. It wasn't just betrayal anymore, it was calculation. He wasn't confused. He wasn't caught in a moment of weakness he regretted. He had a plan. And in his plan, I was simply a placeholder useful until he decided otherwise. I turned around, walked back outside as quietly as I had come in, sat in my car, and allowed myself, finally, privately, to cry. Not for long, just enough to let the pressure out. Then I wiped my face, checked my makeup in the rearview mirror, and walked back inside, acting as if I had just arrived home. "Hey, you're back early," I said, forcing a smile. He looked briefly startled, then smiled back, smooth as always. "Yeah, meeting got canceled. Thought I'd surprise you." The irony of that sentence almost made me laugh. That night, lying beside him in bed, I made a decision. I wasn't going to wait for the right moment to gather everything I needed. I was going to accelerate the plan because now I understood something important. Daniel wasn't just careless. He was dangerous to my future in ways I hadn't fully accounted for. And every day I waited was a day he could move more of our shared resources somewhere I couldn't reach them. The revenge I was building wasn't about hurting him for the sake of hurting him. It was about protecting everything he was quietly trying to take from me. Over the next 2 weeks, I moved with a kind of focus I didn't know I had in me. I met with my lawyer again, this time with a full folder of evidence, financial records, screenshots, photos, and a timeline of Daniel's affair that stretched back at least 8 months. My lawyer's face, usually calm and professional, shifted slightly when she went through it all. "This is thorough," she said. "You've built a very strong position for yourself." I also quietly opened a new bank account in my name only and began redirecting a portion of my own paycheck there legally, transparently, simply protecting myself. I contacted a financial advisor a close friend recommended, someone completely outside our social circle, to understand exactly how to safeguard my son's future college fund from being touched without my knowledge. And I made sure that if Daniel decided to try anything with our remaining shared savings, there would already be a paper trail proving I had noticed the earlier unauthorized transfer months before he ever knew I was watching. At the same time, I began preparing something else. Something Daniel never expected from the quiet, trusting wife he thought he had. I wanted him to face the truth not in private, where he could control the narrative with soft apologies and manipulative excuses, but in a way that made it impossible for him to hide, minimize, or rewrite what he had done. I reached out, carefully and respectfully, to someone at Vanessa's company, someone in HR, whom I contacted not to be vindictive, but because company policy, as it turned out, explicitly prohibited relationships between employees in different departments when one held influence over shared projects, which Daniel, through his ongoing collaboration with marketing, technically did. I simply presented factual information, dates, project overlaps, and the nature of their relationship, without commentary or accusation. What happened next was entirely out of my hands, and that was exactly the point. I wasn't going to be the one making threats or scenes. I was simply going to let the truth exist in daylight and let the natural consequences follow. I also began quietly telling a small, trusted circle of people the truth, not the entire neighborhood, not social media, nothing public or humiliating. Just my sister, my closest friend, and my own parents. People who needed to know the real situation, and who I knew would support me rather than pressure me to just forgive him for the sake of appearances. Every step I took wasn't about revenge in the dramatic, movie-style sense. It was about making sure that when the truth finally broke, Daniel would have nowhere left to hide, and no one left standing beside him pretending it wasn't real. I set the date in my mind. 2 weeks from that night, on our upcoming 12th wedding anniversary, the same day he had already made a dinner reservation at our favorite restaurant, likely, I suspected, more out of habit and image than genuine feeling. He was going to sit across from me at that table, believing everything was still hidden, and I was going to make sure it wasn't. The restaurant was the same one we'd gone to on our first anniversary. Soft lighting, quiet music, the kind of place that felt romantic if you didn't know what was really happening beneath the surface. Daniel ordered wine, made a toast about 12 wonderful years, and reached across the table to hold my hand. I let him. Then I asked him a simple question. "How's work been lately? You've been so busy with that marketing collaboration." Something flickered behind his eyes, a small, barely visible flinch. "Yeah, it's been a lot. Big project. With Vanessa, right?" I said it calmly, the way you'd ask about the weather. His hand went still around his wine glass. "How do I know about the hotel?" I said. "The one 40 minutes away. I know about the money you moved out of our savings account. I know about the phone call you had in the office, the one where you told her I trusted you completely and that you just needed time before you could, and I'm quoting you here, blow everything up." The color drained from his face so quickly, I almost felt sorry for him. "Almost, Rachel. I can explain, you don't have to," I said, still calm, still steady. "I already know everything. I've known for weeks." I slid a folder across the table, copies of everything. The photo from that night, the financial records, a printed timeline. I watched him open it with trembling hands, watched his composure crumble page by page. I also want you to know, I continued, that I already spoke with a lawyer, and that HR at Vanessa's company recently became aware of a workplace policy violation involving unauthorized favoritism and a personal relationship between departments. I didn't cause that situation, Daniel. You did. I simply stopped protecting you from it. He looked up at me, stunned, his mouth opening and closing without any words coming out. The same man who always had a smooth explanation ready, suddenly speechless for the first time in our entire marriage. You knew, he finally said. This whole time, you knew, and you just waited? I waited, I said, because I needed to protect myself and our son before I let you know that I knew. You taught me that lesson yourself, actually. You hid the truth from me for months to protect your own interests. I just did the same thing, except I used the time to protect mine. I stood up from the table, calm and composed, while he sat frozen in his seat, the folder of evidence still open in front of him, other diners glancing over at the sudden tension in the air. Happy anniversary, Daniel, I said quietly. I hope she was worth it. And then I walked out of that restaurant alone, got into my own car, and drove home to my son without looking back once. The weeks that followed unraveled Daniel's carefully hidden second life faster than even I expected. Vanessa's company, after their internal review, terminated her position due to the policy violation regarding the relationship and the misuse of project resources tied to it. Daniel, though he didn't work at the same company, found his own professional reputation shaken as word quietly spread within their shared industry circles, a small, tightly connected world where trust and discretion mattered more than he had ever considered. Financially, the unauthorized transfer he made from our joint account became a significant point in our separation proceedings. Because I had documented it early and consulted a lawyer in advance, I was able to secure a fair and legally protected settlement, one that safeguarded our son's future and ensured I wasn't left starting over from nothing. The way Daniel had likely hoped I would be if he'd been given more time to quietly move things around. Daniel tried more than once to reach out. Apology texts, phone calls late at night, even a handwritten letter left on my car windshield outside my office, something that, a year earlier, might have melted my resolve completely. But the woman reading those messages wasn't the same woman who used to explain away red flags with excuses. I had spent months learning exactly who he really was, and no amount of apology could undo months of careful, deliberate deception. I responded to him only through my lawyer from that point forward. Our son, who was 15 at the time, struggled with the change, as any child would. But I made a point throughout every difficult conversation to never speak badly about his father in front of him. I simply told him the truth in age-appropriate terms. Sometimes people make choices that break trust in a marriage, and sometimes, no matter how much you love someone, staying together isn't healthy for anyone involved. I didn't want my son growing up believing that love means tolerating betrayal quietly. I wanted him to understand that real strength isn't about screaming the loudest, it's about protecting yourself with clarity, patience, and quiet determination, even when your heart is breaking. It's been almost 2 years since that night outside the restaurant. Daniel and I are fully separated now, sharing custody of our son with a level of practical, business-like communication that honestly works better than the emotionally exhausting years leading up to the divorce ever did. He eventually moved to a different city for a new job after the fallout in our shared professional circle made things at his old company uncomfortable in ways he never fully recovered from. I still live in the same house. I renegotiated the mortgage on my own, something I once thought I could never manage without him, and discovered, to my own surprise, that I was fully capable of handling far more than I ever gave myself credit for. I won't pretend the pain disappeared completely. Betrayal like that leaves a mark that doesn't fully fade, even after the anger settles. There were nights, especially in the first few months, where the silence in the house felt heavier than any argument we ever had. There were mornings I looked in the mirror and wondered what I had missed, what signs I had ignored for too long, whether trusting so completely had made me foolish. But over time, I stopped seeing myself as the woman who got fooled and started seeing myself as the woman who got herself out carefully, intelligently, and on her own terms. I think about that night often, sitting in my car outside that hotel, watching my entire understanding of my life change in real time. It would have been so easy to fall apart completely in that moment. In some ways, part of me did. But another part of me, a part I hadn't fully met until then, stepped forward and simply said, "Not like this. Not without a plan. Not without protecting what's mine." If there's one thing I want you to take from this story, it's this. Betrayal often doesn't announce itself with a single dramatic moment. It creeps in slowly, disguised as late nights at work, quiet distance, small excuses that seem too minor to question on their own. And the hardest part isn't usually discovering the truth, it's admitting to yourself that the quiet voice you've been ignoring for months has been right all along. But here's the part that matters even more. How you respond to betrayal defines you far more than the betrayal itself. I could have confronted Daniel that very first night, screaming and crying in a hotel parking lot. It might have felt satisfying for about 5 minutes, but it would have handed him the chance to control the story, to soften the truth, to manipulate the narrative the way he clearly already knew how to do. Instead, I chose patience. I chose quiet strength over loud emotion. I protected myself, my finances, and my son before I ever protected my own need for an emotional confrontation. And in the end, the truth came out anyway, but on my terms, with proof no one could argue against, at a time when I was already standing on solid ground instead of falling apart. If you're someone listening to this who recognizes even a small piece of your own life in this story, the late nights, the distance, the excuses that don't quite add up, please trust yourself enough to look closer. Not out of paranoia, but out of self-respect. You deserve a partner who chooses honesty even when it's difficult, not one who hides behind convenient explanations while quietly building a separate life. And if you're someone who has already lived through a betrayal like this, I hope this story reminds you of something important. Your calm response is not weakness. Your patience is not naivety. Sometimes, the strongest form of justice isn't the loudest one, it's the one built carefully, quietly, and completely, until the truth simply cannot be denied anymore. Because in the end, the people who try to deceive us usually underestimate one thing the most. They underestimate exactly how strong we become, the moment we finally stop pretending not to see.